Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Felipe Santos, and I am honored to moderate this very important panel so that we can learn some more about our future. I am honored also to have very special guests, Dr. Simon Fischel, who will comment on some very interesting innovations that can greatly improve quality of life for women. Mr. Fischel had the privilege of working with a Nobel Prize winner, a British physician, on in vitro fertilization. So it's a very important player. He is greatly experienced in fertilization, and he will share what they are expecting for the future in that area. Very interesting. I also have the honor of having a scientist. At least to me, he is a scientist. We have Valmoli. Besides being the CEO of Brazil RAD, he has been carrying out very interesting work with quantum computers, and he has a company that works with that, and we will hear how it will be able to impact positively the future of our health. And Wilson Cardozo, who is the CTO for Latin America and Brazil at Nokia, and he has developed very interesting technologies that can change the future of health, especially with the new 5G. He has also worked for Siemens in the past, and very great coincidence. We were colleagues at Duke University. We took MBA there in different courses, but in the same school. So I would like to begin by asking Valmoli to explain to us what is this quantum computing that we hear a lot about? How can this impact the health segment and our lives? Thank you very much, Felipe. It's an honor to be with you in this panel discussing a very up-to-date topic, be it for a physical application or for more obscure situations. And this is also being used in Brazil. I also want to begin by thanking Josier and Rodrigo Villar, who I admire greatly. They are wonderful partners. This event is very top level. They are changing the paradigm for health in Brazil. Congratulations for gathering so many good people in one single event. Well, Felipe, the quantum computer today is in the same status of computers when they were created back in the 50s. HELIAC. It's a giant computer with 20,000 valves that used up absurd volumes of energy. So this computer today is in the same status of the past ones. The search now is the quantum processor that will process the information in a quantum manner. So our computers are quantum computers, of course, and the electron is a quantum phenomenon, and manipulating it uses quantum physics. Today, our computer works, or rather the math that it uses is an atom manipulation to process all the information, and we use it in the classical manner with bits, 1 or 0. So the combinations of ones and zeros form information, data, etc. The quantum computer, however, uses a physics phenomena called matter overposition. And therefore, it uses 1 and 0, but both at the same time. And this expands absurdly the processing power of the computer. Today, in order to have a result of a process in a classical computer, you have different equations, one after the other. The quantum computer operates simultaneously with all these results. Therefore, it expands enormously the results. So if you think about simulation for creating new molecules and new drugs, which take weeks of research in supercomputers, we believe that we will have a new paradigm to change this segment. Encryption will also be a segment that will be greatly impacted because encryption today is based on the factoring of numbers, and the computer can do this very rapidly. So if you a process that would take 10,000 years for a supercomputer to resolve, the quantum computer will solve it in 6 seconds. So summarizing, I know it might sound a little bit strange and different because we human beings aren't really prepared to understand quantum physics. But it's important to know that it exists and it can be manipulated. Now, from here to understanding it, that is something different for our limited knowledge. So from what I understand, we can expect an acceleration in the development of new drugs, right? Because it can simulate it instead of waiting for our practical tests. Actually, nowadays, before the drugs go to practical tests, they are simulated. But you're talking about combining atoms. Combining atoms involves a series of factors. When you make a computer simulation, as you raise the factors that influence the result, it makes it harder and harder for the computer to process. That's why it's so hard to reach or find a new molecule today. There are so many combination possibilities that the process is slow for the current processing methodologies. So the whole world is in the same status nowadays with regards to software. Now, coincidentally, Brazil, and this is very good news for us, Brazil is entering the global quantum race tomorrow. So why is Brazil joining this race exactly tomorrow? Because the first Brazilian quantum computer and simulator will be launched or inaugurated tomorrow at the Senai Tech company in Brazil, in the north of Brazil, Bahia, and Brazil will make these developments based on quantum simulation. This means that we will begin to produce software in the quantum language, which is not Java or any other language. It requires and demands programmers who are physicists, and therefore they will develop their mathematical studies with quantum technology. Then they will transfer it to the CIMATEC computer, quantum computer, and get the results. But we're still not talking about quantum supremacy. That would be a quantum computer that obtains results that are better than the classical supercomputer. But right now, we can at least test. So when we have the quantum advanced technology and only Google and China have it and have it demonstrated actually, so it's the Chinese government and Google. So when we finally have access to this quantum processor in the market, we will be able to get everything we're doing and throw it there. Obviously, this will not be an exclusively quantum process. The systems are hybrid, and I think that this will be the big thing. You will need, with these new quantum computers, you will need a different internet. But so Brazil is entering this race tomorrow. And here at the state of Santa Catarina, we are setting up a laboratory for quantum computing to attend to the market's needs. So tomorrow we are launching our partnership with Cimatex Computer so that simultaneously we can develop solutions to input processes in that computer and extract results. So it's biotechnology in the area of molecules, in the investment area also for the financial market that will bring many benefits with the speed of the market, and encryption. The risk of the quantum computer for encryption is so high that there are entire graduation courses on quantum computing to protect the encryption of these quantum computers. Very interesting. And this leads me to another race we hear of today, which is the 5G race. We see companies investing in 5G around the world. Recently, there was an auction in Brazil, and the companies are getting prepared for it. But my questions are that we had 4G, which was an improvement of 3G. You can access larger files. You can see video on your smartphone. And many people ask me, what is the advantage or the benefit of 5G? Will the speed increase? What's the difference? So I would like you to, Wilson, to talk to us about this with all the knowledge you have from Nokia. What will 5G bring to us in the next 5 years? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to share this panel with you. I believe you have observed my backdrop. I am in a hotel in Brasilia right now and not in our office because we're here in Brasilia for the Communications Week. And we are displaying a 5G connected ICU unit, of course. And we are going to demonstrate it in this event. Now, what happens with regards to connectivity for society in 5G? 5G has some foundation blocks. The first one is exactly to bring more bandwidth and connectivity. It's like a continuity of 4G. We will go beyond 10 meg or bits per second, people popularly call 5 meg, to 10 meg, 100 megabits per second. We have already tested 4 gigabits per second of connectivity. I believe that Professor Fischel is using 100 megabits per second in his smartphone in Europe, but we see this revolution in speed. Now there's a second evolution that comes with 5G, which is low latency. Low latency, which is the time that a device needs to be processed in the network and return. And if you have any question about low latency, you can ask your teenage son or nephew or niece, because that's the problem they find when it takes them a long time to lose in the video game. And this is very important for us in health services. This mobile ICU that we are displaying today depends on a latency that is from 20 to 30 milliseconds, which will only be enabled by 5G. We have other points. Connectivity of millions of devices per square kilometer. Actually, we are working today to connect 1 million devices per square kilometer. When we finally are able to do that, we imagine that the price of connectivity per device will drop drastically. They will become much more cheaper. So you can monitor blood pressure, heart rate, and your everyday life with quantum computers in the hospital that will describe and monitor our life, life will become much better. And this is a basic foundation of health, which is to help in prevention and not in correction. So when we focus on prevention, we can expand our life expectancy by 10 or 15 years, because we will be able to be controlled by physicians permanently, and they will recommend what kind of corrections and changes we have to make in our habits, nutrition, etc., so that we can have a perfect prevention for our health. This will be the revolution. One example is that in this mobile ICU that we are connecting with 5G, for each bed will have 10 megabits per second. The software that is being developed by partners here in Brazil, in the state of Paraíba, with the Federal University of Campina Grande, will monitor hundreds of hospitals and with hundreds of beds. So imagine how much data that is. Another application we are demonstrating is a robot that tries to bring medication, drugs, from a pharmacy and deliver them. We have already measured this in some places around the world. A nurse in a hospital walks 12 kilometers per week to bring drug to the bedsides. Is it the nurse's job to carry drugs around, or is it their job to be at the patient's bedside? Of course, the latter. And if you replace this function for a robot, it will be much more efficient. And you can also use robots for discarding materials, for example, and they can produce much more severe decontamination processes, and they will not be contaminated, and they will not bypass the decontamination process, and no mistakes will happen. So with that, we begin to envision all the possibilities that technology will bring to help us. And this will be brought by 5G. So it's not only the speed, it's a combination of three things: speed, low latency, and connectivity of more devices, all with greater reliability, of course, with the 5G connections. This is what we are bringing to different parts of the world. And here in Brazil, of course, we need these very important technologies. Wow, Wilson, so interesting. I've been working more and more with connectivity, and we will have the wearables, which will certainly improve our quality of life. And also this technology will probably do away with so many wires and cables in the ICU. The patient looks like a puppet with so many wires and cables. So this will certainly disappear in a near future. Now, what you mentioned about quality of life and extending patients' life, this is intimately connected to what Mr. Fischel will bring to us. Dr. Fischel has been working at ProFam in a technology to improve the quality of life of women, especially with regards to menopause. So, Dr. Fischel, please tell us what this technology can do and what benefits it will bring to our women in terms of quality of life.
Thank you, Felipe. And thank you all for the honor of inviting me here. We could do with 5G right now because I'm not sure whether you're experiencing the same latency I am, but I have about a 1 or 2 second delay, so I hope it doesn't upset your experience, but it's an honor for me to be with you. And to explain what ProFam really is about, it actually stands for protecting fertility and menopause. But the real basis of ProFam is about the issue of menopause. And what I decided to do when I brought in our pioneers and our world authorities with menopause protection concept is to look at what is being done at the moment for women with menopausal issues. First of all, let's just say that every woman has the menopause to look forward to. If they live long enough, of course, the menopause will happen. It is a biological event that occurs when the ovary no longer carries its pools of eggs. So a woman is born with all the eggs she'll ever possess, and they start to deteriorate over time. And that's when the menopause hits, when actually the ovary starts to run out of those eggs. We call it the ovarian reserve. It's the egg pool. And that tends to hit a woman around about the age of 50, 51 years of age on average. Now, what that brings in is a dramatic reduction in the production of her estrogen and also the progesterone. These are what are called the ovarian hormones, the ovarian steroids. They bring about her reproductive cycle, and they bring a lot of other benefits to her physiology, her hormonal function. And when that estrogen drops dramatically because the ovary is no longer functioning, we understand the menopausal symptoms. Now, if you go back about 150 years, most women, by about 10 years after childbirth, probably will have died. Whereas today, a woman will be in her menopausal period for maybe as long or longer than she was in her fertile period. She could be in the menopausal period for about 40 years. The menopausal symptoms, as we all probably understand, has a dramatic range. The very serious consequences can be a decline in cognitive function, the increased risks of cardiovascular disease, and the one that's commonly understood is osteoporosis. But there are many other very uncomfortable symptoms as well as those serious symptoms too. Of course, a woman loses her young, youthful skin. It gets dry. There are vaginal problems. There are sexual problems. There are sleepless problems, mood swings. There are many changes that come in the menopausal phase. And of course, a woman today of mid-40s to mid-50s is almost like the old 30s. They're young, they're active, some of them are still wanting children, and there's certainly many of them in high professional lives. And this causes an awful lot of issues for them. If we can largely say, on average, about a third of the women will just sail through the menopause and they'll not know what the fuss is all about. Another third of women will have significant problems with the menopause, and 2/3 of the women will be offered hormone replacement therapy. We call it HRT, which is a pharmaceutical estrogen and a pharmaceutical progesterone. They're not bioidentical products, and they're certainly not physiological. And the one thing that is absolutely certain, they're not delivered physiologically. When we produce our hormones, when a woman produces her ovarian hormones, we do it in lots of rhythmical ways. They can be what we call daily rhythms, diurnal rhythms, night and day rhythms. They can be pulsatile rhythms. They pulse over several hours, all in response to other hormones. We exist in a wonderful, exquisitely orchestrated system of interactions between all our organs and all our tissues and all our hormones. And when we lose that, when we start to give drugs in a manner that is a pharmaceutical way, then we lose the kind of natural physiology. Now, I decided that as good as chemistry can be and as good as pharmacology can be, actually, there is nothing more exquisite in functioning in that whole orchestra of hormones than the organ itself. We can do, look at what we heard today with 5G and with quantum mechanics, and all this is fantastic technology. But as yet, we can't actually create a kidney, a liver, a heart, an ovary that can do what that tiny organ can actually do. So for us to think about, can we provide a sort of menopause period protection, a physiological or natural HRT that the ovary and the body provides when the woman is in the premenopausal state in any other way than the ovary does? And clearly the answer to that is no. So for an individual woman, and for the massive, massive healthcare costs of increasing menopausal age, for example, if you just look in Canada, the osteoporosis budget was something like 3 billion in about 20 years ago. It's now about 33 billion just for osteoporosis, because women are living longer and having menopause-related conditions. Never mind all the other conditions that menopausal clinics try to treat. So maybe we need to do a little bit better than, or offer something different to the hormone replacement therapy that we have. It's good, it helps a lot of women, but it's not perfect, and many women can't actually handle these hormone replacement therapy drugs very well. And you see clinics all over the world full of women who are trying to try a new one, or change a different dose, or try a different combination, because it's not quite working. So what if they could have their own hormones that were being produced before the menopause, at the point that they're about to transition into the menopause, and continue that for 5, 10, or 20 years into her menopausal period, not going through the menopausal state? We can do this absolutely naturally. But and this is for the clever people that came long before me. They've been doing it for children and women who are at risk of losing their fertility due to cancer and other diseases that will mean that their ovaries will be damaged or removed, and they will not have any ovarian function. Now, we now know from 20 years in cancer work that if you take an ovary and you cut it into very, very, very tiny slices and you freeze it, it will stay frozen for many years. It will keep that the eggs that it has, and therefore the ability to produce hormones, in a very good condition. And years later, it can be thawed out, transplanted back into the woman. She can produce eggs, her fertility is restored, and she can have children. For example, in one of my clinics, we treated a woman who, when she was 9 years old, she lost both of her ovaries due to cancer when she was a child. So she never went through the normal puberty, but she was given hormones. She married at the age of 19. Some of the ovarian tissue was transplanted back, and she then produced eggs. She had her first baby at 21. She's now had her second baby. So we know it works. To be able to produce those eggs, the woman is producing her hormones long before the eggs are produced, regenerating her hormones, and that graft of tissue can last many years. So I decided to join the dots when we formed ProFam and say, well, look, if we're now doing this worldwide, it's no longer considered experimental for cancer patients. Why don't we open the door and offer it as an opportunity for women to preserve the tissue for hormonal restoration, not just for fertility preservation? So we could transfer this frozen tissue as a graft back, not into the reproductive system, but we can transfer it anywhere. Under the skin. We could put it under the armpit if we wish. As long as it's attached to a blood supply, within 3 to 4 months, 95% of women will kickstart the production of hormones. And that graft can last for many years. And the way ProFam technology works is we remove 1/3 of the outer surface of one ovary only. We divide it up into tiny slices, and we should get 3 chances of transfer of the tissue. So the first slices will be transferred back. The woman's hormones will be produced. It may last 4 or 5 years. Then when that is slowly declining, we'll transfer another graft back, hopefully maybe lasting for 20 years. And we know that the removal of this tissue, even the removal of a whole ovary, doesn't affect a woman's normal fertility, because it's like 2 kidneys. The other kidney functions, the other ovary functions, and it doesn't reduce her time to going to the menopause. Maximally, it may reduce it by up to 1 year, even if you remove the whole ovary. And that's pretty insignificant if you're going to give her 10 or 20 years of hormone, natural, her own individual natural hormone replacement. So the idea of ProFam is to extend that woman's period, not necessarily for fertility, but to replace the requirement of hormone replacement pharmaceutical agents with her own natural physiological hormone production.
Quite interesting, the ability that this project has of expanding, of improving the quality of life of women. I know because I've followed my mother going through this period, and it's quite critical, and for you to be able to do it in a more natural way, improving quality of life, this is fantastic. I'd like to take the opportunity, because I've actually mentioned to Lucier that I was going to have fun with this group, because we have a totally diverse group, each one with different backgrounds and different areas. That's the beauty of it, different visions to the same problem, and with that getting to solutions, and more interesting solutions. This is valid for a panel. You have different people looking perhaps at the same issue from totally different viewpoints. I have a question. With all my experience, I have over 18, 19 years in healthcare, and I see healthcare has a great challenge ahead in Brazil and also around the world. People, as Dr. Fischer said, are living longer, and they want to live this longer life with quality. I joke that I have turned 50 this year. The 50 are the new 40s. Today you get to the 50s as you would get to the 40s some years ago. But all of this has a price. If people live longer and people want to live their lives with quality, this increases costs to healthcare. You use the services much more. And I'd like to hear from each one of you. I'd like to ask each one of you the following. How do you see the technologies? How can these technologies help in this equation that healthcare is increasingly more used? How can we balance that? I'd like to start by asking Barmani how he sees this, and then I'll ask the others. Felipe, as Professor Fischer said, it's quite interesting. We're so used to having super high speed internet, men going to Mars, etc. If you don't have infrastructure or basic sanitation, most countries in the world, people don't have basic sanitation, don't have clean water or fresh water or drinking water. And healthcare is the citizen at home with their family. Healthcare is not hospital, it's not quantum technology to produce more drugs, to postpone citizens' life with low quality of life. Of course, living is priceless, but this is not the path. The path is prevention, is quality of life. But this is a bit away from our possibilities, because we're talking about individuals. I think this conversion, this change comes from education. at the basis. An education that provides quality of life with good eating practices, physical activity, regarding also approaches regarding stress. I think this is much stronger. It seems that it's much easier to have super innovative technology that somehow it's a sort of palliative to postpone the citizen's life than at the base to improve the citizen's life, to actually allow the citizen to get to, we're going to be a citizen at 80 with a profile of 50. But it's so used. But we're also talking about a small part of the population that can get to 50s with 40s features or 60s just like the 50s. Why? Because they were able to study, because they had a slightly differentiated life. It's not most of the population. In terms of technology, yes, of course, there are mechanisms to help. I visited Israel and actually Rodrigo Villar. We were on a mission together there, and we were so impressed. 30 years, for 30 years, the information on healthcare have been stored. In Brazil, we're still digitizing, so moving from paper, but even creating mechanisms that copy paper in a digital way, not transforming things, using the data to get results, at least to pay for the bills. So for 30 years, they have health care information, they are digitized. So if I have a startup and I prove that I'm going to handle the information, create a solution that the government has mechanisms to give me the data sets and so that I can make analysis. Healthcare there is predictive. They know the history of my family. They know the health, the medical records of my parents. They know how much the healthcare of my son and my daughter will cost to the system. This is the path that technology can actually help. So they can approach a citizen and say, look, you have this medical health record. For example, they know the DNA, all the risk factors, everything is quantified. For example, breast cancer, but you're a smoker, the likelihood of your developing breast cancer is quite high. That's predictable. So technology can actually bring. So speaking of quantum computation, so what's interesting about this speech? One thing is, say, data. Israel, I think there are about 8 million inhabitants there. The other thing is analyzing data of 200 million inhabitants, which is the case of Brazil. We need to have robust processing. You have to have sound technology. We talk about big data, but intelligence is still part of the human being. They have to see the data, interpret the data, and ask the correct questions. And the computer would answer what we want within this scenario. With this significant amount of data, when we talk about preventive, predictive medicine, we have possibility of boarding quantum technologies to get to the results. But your question is quite challenging. Of course, this is my opinion, but there is an array that is quite diversified of opinions on this situation. We maintain the human being alive, in many cases with low quality of life, and turning the system significantly expensive. And this bill, at a certain point, will be unsustainable, especially when we think about those technologies getting to the market at amounts or values that are unaffordable. And then we move into this speech of, obviously, okay, fair enough. That drug for cancer is 2 million reais. How much does the citizen's life cost? But the company has developed a technology. They have a bill to pay for that development. It's easier to understand from this standpoint.
I imagine that sometimes decisions are not so easy to make and they involve costs and life and how you quantify this. The more formulas you might have, it is very hard to come to the right one. And it also varies according to the kind of person. Of course, for each individual, the value is infinite, but it's something that maybe technology can help us with. And thank you for your views. And I believe that the wearables can also help us. So let us hear Wilson now. How do you see this aspect? How can you control and create quality of life, longer lives for people in a feasible manner? Well, Felipe, we already talked about the wearables and about how they can help all this process. And there is another point that Valmori touched upon, which is the amount of information that is produced. We have some stats from the United States, and the volume of data generated for the patients has grown from 2003 to 2020, 13 times. So it's an absurd amount, and we have a lot of information, but very little knowledge produced from it. So if we are raising 13 times more patient information, imagine the cost of that. And many countries like ours have issues. Some statistics we have around the world, by cutting down on paper costs in the hospital, we can have a economy, a savings of $5 per patient per month. That is significant, and it would help in the total sum. But I am also very afraid of something that 5G proposes to help, which is the autonomous or self-driving car. We have millions of accidents with fatalities every year. So let's say that an autonomous car is responsible for 90 or 99% of these accidents. What is the ultimate impact on the health chain if we eliminate 98% of these accidents? First of all, of course, nobody can drive and drink or drive and be drugged, and nobody will drive at higher speeds. So if we eliminate 99% of that, the cost compared to the impact will be enormous. And the impact on pollution also and health in large cities is enormous. So all these impacts can collaborate to help the complete health system, which is ultimately is paying bills. We have the system needs to support all these bills and all these costs. All of them have to be paid for. It may be a critical and individual vision that I am expressing, but if you can help 20 million people in our country is different from caring for 8 million people in Israel. That, of course, it's much easier there than in Brazil, where simply to transport vaccines, you might have to travel 3 days by boat. And it's not a boat that has freezers. It's a boat that depends on dry ice in an ice box, and you pray that it will arrive in good conditions. So we'll have the freezers to develop and to deliver vaccines in the Amazon. Well, we might reach that day once, but it's not close. So we need to think that the technology is more focused on our large cities. It's not very far away if the cities are in Israel, in the US, or in the UK. But we also have to think about the remote regions of our country and how they can have more access. And maybe how we can use telemedicine, tele-education, so that education can help in health. We know that many health problems come from lack of education, sanitation, for instance. So I see that we can have an optimistic prospect. And maybe by working with all these factors together, we can even extend our lives with quality. And maybe when we are 80, we will look like we are 40 or 50. One point that both of you mentioned and that is very important is inclusion. You will have people with access to technology and education who have healthcare since an early age, but you have a majority of a population in Brazil and around the world where you don't. And you're talking about 1.6 billion people. This is what they are going through. So what can you do in a smaller country where you have a well set up infrastructure and a long-standing one is not applied to countries that have no infrastructure or where it is still being built. So these are major challenges. Very interesting point you raised. Now, Professor Fischel, I would like to hear from your broad experience, so many years working in a country where technology is already established and much more advanced. You also have a public health system that is similar to the Brazilian, but much more advanced. How do you see quality of life, longer lives, and costs? How do you think we will deal with that in the future?
So I think what has been said has been critically important to understanding that our global community, our different communities around the world will each have its different challenges. But in terms of the overarching question as to whether technology can improve human health, our magnificent biological machine that we own, that can live longer, but live longer more healthily, this I have no doubt can be achieved. But it's just, where can it be achieved, and what does it take to achieve it? It takes some very big features, I think. First of all, we have to clean up our world, because, as I mentioned, we live in a very polluted world, and the toxins are there. They're subtle, they build up, they affect our reproductive systems dramatically. We've learned that over the years. For example, most men's sperm count today are a third of their grandfather's sperm count, for example, because really due to the toxins in our environment. And that can be translated across all our endocrine systems, that they are being damaged. And that's our world. So we have to engage technology and politics and everything else to clean up our world, and there's a cost to that. But that's one pillar that I would say is extremely important. The other pillar is the predicted element of the ravages of nature. The reason we have medicine is because the natural order of things is that nature causes deterioration, and we provide medicine to try to aid the human condition, often to counteract what nature has done. Simple appendicitis, for example, would have killed somebody many years ago, but now it's nothing, but only because we have a process that deals with that ravaging of nature. Now, a lot of disease, we can get early predictive aspects. Now, there are two gentlemen with us this evening. They will bring their change to our world that will be unbelievable. One of the great aspects, the problems I think the physicians have, is being able to make the right decisions in the right individual patient. And they can't hold in their head all the literature that's out there. They can't make those diagnoses from thousands of publications that they know are out there, and they've read a fraction of them. So that's what computing will bring. The sophisticated, you will look to the robot to diagnose and to suggest the treatment, and then you will have the connectivity that will provide the potential to predict that individual's condition by so many parameters that will be measured. But of course, you will need the third pillar, and we've all talked about this, there needs to be buy-in by the human being. We might be able to clean up the world for them, but if they're not going to pay attention to what we say is important for their lives, then they're still going to create their own individual damage. So again, there has to be that education that's really critical to that. But we are entering a world that is going to be extremely interesting. For example, patients today who go through IVF. There is now one company in the world, and it will expand, that is now offering patients the opportunity to have their embryos screened. Now, we've been screening chromosomes and genes in embryos for many decades now, but they are providing a health score on that embryo. And this will create, it has created ethical discussions. But if individuals want to do this, there is the opportunity to look at the choice of, say, 10 embryos, and we can only put one embryo back. You could choose one that has the highest health score, the lowest risk of diabetes, the lowest risk of cardiovascular disease, the lowest risk of several cancers. Now, people might say, well, to do it after IVF is one thing, but actually, if you had that information from birth, we know that in any aspect of healthcare, to be pre-warned is pre-armed. And if we are thinking about personalized medicine and individualized opportunity of treatment of drugs, for example, we need that information. And I think another area that quantum computing is going to revolutionize is the understanding of our genome and the understanding of our genome in relation to our health. So we can understand the risk factors of each human being through their genetics, through the other early predictive factors that they might produce due to our connectivity to them and their body. We hopefully will clean up our world, but all this is happening gradually, and it is making a difference. There are more and more people living healthier, longer. So it is happening. It's just that as a global world and as a global nation, the challenges are so different in each zone, in each area, in each small community. But it's there. We can see it. Anybody with any vision now can see that those possibilities are really there, and it will happen in some form or other. And thanks to the colleagues and the technologies of the colleagues that I've been listening to on this very program this evening, these are the things that are going to make the difference.
Thank you very much, Professor Fischel. These were very wise words. Some of the things that you brought us.
I have seen, and I think the pandemic, and just like every major crisis, it generates great opportunities. If I'm not mistaken, the term for crisis in China also means opportunity. So I believe it generates great opportunities. One of the great opportunities coming up with this pandemic is greater union of countries on some topics. I think the environment is one of them. I am taking a course to become a board member, and I am a board member in some companies, and I've seen commitment of board of administrations in many companies that are concerned about the environment, things that they were not focused on and were not concerned. So they want people to talk about this topic. It's been growing not only on a government level, but also within private companies. It's a great effect to us because the governments can go to a certain point for private companies or initiatives to see the advantages, and when they act, the outreach is much greater. So we have seen those changes. So I think there is a huge advantage regarding data. We're still developing regulations as to how we can use the data, specifically genetic data, because they generate some ethical issues. When you start knowing when the person is more prone to developing certain diseases, couldn't this actually lead to increasing the price of the person's health insurance? So how do we handle the data in an ethical way? This is quite important. The regulation, I joke that it is just like quantum field, where as you develop the program, you're developing software. So you're collecting the data and you have to develop the regulation for it. Things are moving in parallel. So this is something that we're learning a lot, and this will certainly generate great benefits and will help change people's behavior, which is the most important thing. If we don't change people's behavior, we don't change the outcome. Einstein said a phrase that to me is my motto. Crazy is doing the same thing and expect a different result. If we don't change, the results are going to be the same always. So, my friends, we're getting to the end of our time here. I'd like to take the opportunity and thank you very much for your presence. It's been a very enriching chat. A good day is a day which you learn, and I will leave here with some friends, people that we can continue chatting about this in the future. I am passionate for this, and I can see that you are also passionate people, and let's keep in touch and perhaps meet in future panels. So I'd like to thank you for your presence, Dr. Simon Bishop Wilson and Valmoli, and thank you very much for your participation. And good evening to all of you, or even good night to you, sir. And great success to you all. And greetings to Josier and Rodrigo, who have had this wonderful idea to organize this wonderful event. Thank you very much indeed.